Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It is a joy to be with you today. We have got a lot to talk about, so let's get right to it. Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency. Well, there is no department because Congress didn't create it, but people are still getting pink slips. Almost 2.3 million letters of termination have gone out. What do you do? And as we're looking at this, the mythology of this bloated government, oh my goodness, is too big, it's so unwieldy. The fact is, government has been shrinking for quite some time. I was absolutely stunned when I read this morning, but of course, I would leave it to this brilliant economist, Dr. Algernon Austin from the Center for Economic and Policy Research, to give us the word about this. And I have to tell you, the director of their Race and Economic uh, Policy Project, Economic Justice, excuse me. I want to read a little bit to you because when I read this, I said, wait a minute, I had to post it. I had to cut it, paste it, post it. Because I said before, even if you don't read it, I want you all to have this information. And of course, the federal government is too small. You, Dr. Algernon Austin, and is it Dr. Jordan Billings?
No, he's not a doctor.
Okay, but he certainly
He might have a
cover.
master's degree. I'm not. Yeah, I think he has a master's.
Oh, well, pshaw. Titles. He certainly helped you to bring this information together, and we thank him for that. When Donald Trump was born, you wrote, the federal government workforce made up 4.5% of all non-farm workers. Today, the federal workforce makes up only 1.5%. When Donald Trump was born in the early 40s, the federal workforce was 4.5% of the general workforce. Now it's down to 1.5%. Look, I'm not in aviation, but many of us have wondered. Well, certainly in 1981, when a whole class of very necessary workers were fired, the air traffic controllers in all of the United States of America, we were concerned. And I remember my parents remarking, look, this is going to affect you for generations. It was a particular concern because my father took the plane like most people take the bus. I mean, literally every day of the week because of the work that he did. And we took the plane regularly. And in fact, my mother refused to fly me to college. She said, no, we will drive. I said, drive? What? She said, oh, your father can fly. I'm not doing it. And I don't know if we ever recovered from that. A whole class of workers. And then we see all of these plane crashes and mishaps over the past week and a half, 2 weeks. Attorney Terry O'Neill, Attorney Darrell Jones, you can't help but make the connection. And when you think of all that, now we're beginning to see, as the JFK Library at Harvard was closed, just what the federal government does. That's not even the tip of the iceberg. So I'm giving the floor to you, Dr. Austin, because when this first happened, you said it's going to take me a minute kind of to tease all of this information out. I need to find out what's happening. But now you've been able to do it, and most of us do not know. It is shocking. It was shocking to me, and I'm an information wonk, that our federal workforce has been shrinking. Talk to us.
Yeah, so I mean, it's something that yes, we haven't talked about enough, but you are probably aware for many years that Republicans have been, trying to cut back on federal government. Under the Obama administration, there was that whole sequestration moment where there was a freeze. So the conservatives have been chipping away at the federal workforce and suppressing it for quite some time. So many agencies, I think most of the major agencies, are actually down significantly over the past few decades. And like you said, The federal government is tiny compared to when Donald Trump was born. And it's important that you brought up the sort of air traffic control because the Trump administration, although we know that the National Air Traffic Controllers Association says that 40% of their members are working 6 days a week, 10 hours a day. So way beyond full time. They're stressed, they're fatigued. Many of them are quitting. And our current administration just fired more of them. It's like we don't have sufficient staff, but the Doge is just willy-nilly just hacking away. First, as we've been talking about, the whole premise of a sort of bloated federal government is absolutely false. The federal government is too small, as I mentioned. The federal government is just a fraction of what it was when Donald Trump was born. And over time, not only has it shrunk relative to the overall workforce, we have put more demands on the federal government today than when Donald Trump was born. So it doesn't make any sense. The Department of Government Efficiency is not doing anything that will make our government better. It won't make our government more efficient. And it in the long run, it won't save money because when there are natural disasters that we don't respond to, when planes fall out of the air, when our veterans don't get adequate health care, when our banks fail because the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, is also understaffed, that's going to end up costing us more in the long run. You know, they say an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Well, Doge is getting rid of all of the prevention and creating a situation where we're going to be subject to all sorts of disasters and literal disasters, because they're also reducing our ability to respond to wildfires. And, they're cutting FEMA, they're cutting our wildfire resources, they're cutting our health care. So it's a complete disaster. So it's important for people to really recognize that Doge is not a smart, sensible approach to trying to address the problems in our federal government. It's a chaotic, it's people who don't know what they're doing, just intent on destruction, who don't appreciate the importance of the federal government and recognize that the federal government is a huge part of our economy. And they're just blowing things up. And that's not the way that you make things better.
Let me ask you this, Dr. Austin. Are they trying to, and maybe it's too early to tell, outsource everything, privatize? Because we've seen this with the post office. You have so many business persons who want to come in on our government services and take them over, right? And because they can, of course, they say in the name of efficiency. Look, the postal workers are very efficient. You get your tax refunds on time. All that stuff is processed. These people operate at a very high rate of efficiency. It is insulting to see these people assaulted this way. And yet you see these business persons who want to take apart the government and they want to replace it with private business. I mean, please, even FedEx uses and Amazon, they use the government to deliver their packages.
Yeah, so I think there are multiple things going on here. One is, and again, this is part of the history of the decline of the federal government. Yes, a lot of federal work has been pushed into the private sector because, private companies then get to profit from them. People who donate to conservative politicians and even some, maybe liberal politicians benefit when they get to do the work of the government when they're a private company. And it's important. That doesn't save any money. That's more expensive because people in the private sector tend to earn more than similar people in the public sector. So when you shift government work to the private sector, it's more expensive. It's not less expensive. It's more profitable for private industries and maybe people who donate to politicians, but it's not saving the American taxpayer any money. So yeah, I think that is part of what's going on. But I think more importantly is destroying. There's both distraction and destruction going on here.
Mm.
So example, let's talk about the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. That agency has saved the American people billions, tens of billions of dollars, protects people from all sorts of financial fraud. So why would someone supposedly interested in helping the American people, get rid of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which protects the American people? Well, if you're planning to move into the finance sector, like Musk is supposed to be planning, and you don't want to be regulated, then it helps you personally to get rid of the CFPB. So, that's the other thing. There's a huge ethical violation that someone who's in charge of private companies regulated by the federal government, private companies doing business and making profits of the federal government, also basically running the federal government at the same time. I mean, he's moving into the Defense Department. He makes a ton of money from the Defense Department. How is that not an ethical conflict? It's absurd.
And no one's checking him.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the first things that they did, they fired the inspectors, a whole bunch of inspectors generals. It's like, why would you do that? Because you're planning to do things that the inspectors will disapprove of. So I think the other thing that people need, there's an article in the New York Times pointing out that Trump is making all these deals. He's using his office as, he's using his position as president to make deals for the Trump businesses. Again, huge conflicts. So part of what's going on is, these unethical practices, these sort of, deals that profit, Trump Industries and Musk Industries. So that's part of what's going on. And it's unfortunate that the Republicans in Congress have abdicated their responsibility to be a check on the executive office.
Well, and the corporate media have abdicated their responsibilities as well, because they have not pressed the case. They could do that. When they want to press the case on anyone or anything, they are merciless. But somehow or another, Dr. Algernon Austin from the Center for Economic Policy and Research, they let the oligarchs go. They could press Elon Musk on these conflicts of interest. They're ethical. They are actual conflicts. I mean, there's nothing amorphous about the fact that he is a huge military contractor. If you're going to cut anything, first you need to cut the Pentagon. They have failed 7 consecutive audits. Really. But no one's touching them, and the corporate media are not pressing them at all. They're not pressing the Pentagon. How is it that you fail 7 consecutive audits? If you want to talk about inefficiency, something's going on there. Zelensky said, maybe he's not the most credible guy. I don't know, but I do know this. He said, you said you've given me X amount of dollars, but $100 billion of it I didn't get. Well, where is it? I just want to know these things. In the meantime, as you outlined in your article, I mean, you gave us some interesting examples when you talked about bank failures, but let's start with veterans, because veterans don't get what they need.
Yeah, so it's important to recognize that a huge part of what the federal workforce are people working serving veterans. So when they're cutting, when Musk is just willy nilly slashing the workforce and firing people in their probationary period, which could last 2-3 years in some cases. They are reducing veteran services. There is already a shortage of medical officers and nurses in the VA Health Administration. And rather than trying to address that shortage, they're making it worse. They're making the problem worse. So our veterans will be underserved. And since we're talking about veterans, let me also mention that the federal government is an important equal opportunity employer. They have been an important affirmative action employer. And people forget, or people don't know, I should say, not forget, people don't know that veterans are a protected class, a target class in affirmative action policy. So they did say, oh, we hate affirmative action. Affirmative action is terrible, but leave the one for veterans.
Yeah.
They didn't say that. But in their sort of willy-nilly random slashing of the federal workforce, they are going to hurt a lot of veterans and a lot of veterans with disabilities. Because again, they don't really know what they're doing. They're just like throwing grenades and saying, if you get hit, too bad. So they are going to put a lot of veterans out of work, and including veterans with disabilities out of work, who thought they had secure employment in the federal government.
Well, and then when you moved on to bank failures, I mean, let's back up a minute, because these people, Marco Elez, 25 years of age, said I was racist before it was cool. He's fired. And they bring him back. He made a pejorative statement about eliminating Indians. J.D. Vance's wife is Indian American. He advocated for him to be brought back. Okay. That part, he's not my husband, so there you have it. But I think it's a horrible thing just as a human being for someone to say. Then you've got a 19-year-old. I mean, I understand that when people have these skills, particularly in the tech space, the government will pull them and will train them. I mean, that's what happened with Edward Snowden. I mean, when you have those kind of gifts, because they need that. We now have something called micro degrees. I get all of that. That having been said, you have these people who have not been vetted, who have access to our bank records. Wait a minute. Our bank records, Dr. Austin. I'm trying to figure out how there is no hue and cry about that.
It's incredible, and it's not even clear. Well, first of all, nothing that they're doing is clear. They are the most opaque, entity ever. Only the CIA is more obscure than Doge, I think. And it's not clear why they need all of our information. They really don't. Yeah, all of it. All of it. All of our, all of our tax information, all of our social security information. They don't need that. They don't need that. That is not, you don't need that to address the, problems in the federal government. You do not need our individual information. So that's another, thing that should not be allowed. It is not clear, yes, who they are and who they work for, right? We don't know. We know that at least half of them were pulled from Musk's companies, but do they get a paycheck from the federal government, or are they getting a paycheck from Elon Musk? Who are they have allegiance to? Did they agree to any security protocols? Did they take an oath to uphold the Constitution? We don't know. This is absurd that we have allowed these people, that Congress and the Republicans in Congress have allowed these people to take over our federal government. It is outrageous.
I mean, have they pledged? I mean, I want to know which Constitution they've pledged allegiance to.
That's the other question. Yes.
I don't know. I mean, this is so bizarre because you have so many of these oligarchs are globalists, and they don't have the best interests of Americans first. I mean, they're transnationalists. That's what I call them. Their businesses are here, there, everywhere, and they're cutting deals here, there, everywhere. And they care about, not me, they care about their money. And so I want to know from you, what about, I mean, since they have access to the banks, we know that the FDIC is understaffed. And the economy, I mean, it has its strengths, but it also has its vulnerabilities. That much is very clear. I don't know if we're as clear on our vulnerabilities as we ought to be. I see a potential problem here with these people who I do not know, who are of questionable backgrounds. What could they do with my information, particularly under Elon Musk, who on his X platform wants to create a platform that would be the go-to for everything that we do, banking and everything.
Yes.
So
yes.
he's capturing our information really for his business purposes. Isn't that?
Yeah. So yes, information, as we should be aware of, information is money. Information is power. All of these tech companies, what they really trade in, we think we're using apps, but what we're really trading in is our data and our information. And Trump and the Republicans in Congress has just said, take all of it. Take all of our data. Take any data you can find anywhere, and do whatever you want with it, because there's no one overseeing. No one knows what Doge is actually doing. No one is overseeing Doge. No one knows what security protocols. And the other thing that the security analysts are wondering, because these people don't know the security protocols, has that information, has all the information that they have captured also been captured by foreign governments, because they don't know the security protocols? Have they essentially given all of our information to the Chinese government, to the Russian government, to the Iranian government, to the North Korean government? We don't know, because they're a black box. Like I said, only the CIA is more opaque than Doge.
That is frightening. That really is. Well, I don't want to be selfish before you go. Terry O'Neill, would you like to ask Dr. Austin something before he goes, before I ask him one final question?
Wow. I don't know where to begin. And Dr. Austin, thank you so much for the article that you wrote about that. I was like, yes, really. And I will tell you that all the years that I spent kind of down in the trenches, working for women's rights, right? And when I was in DC doing that, working with CEPR, it's a wonderful organization, and getting all kinds of data from you all that allowed me to do this. Yeah. But since I've retired and, no longer doing the day-to-day of that work, it has become so much clearer to me. I mean, a few years ago, I remarked to a friend of mine that, oh my God, capitalism is just so broken. And she said, maybe it's broken, but maybe it's actually working as designed. And that kind of brought me up short. So I was just a smart person, and I thought, well, I better think about that a little bit. And two things really have jumped out at me over the last few years, not just in this moment when shock and awe is MUMP, as I call them. That's President Musk and Trump combined. They are trying to shock and awe us into submission. But even a few years ago, I began to think, when I hear financial reporters and financial journalists talking about productivity, right? That sounds like a really positive thing. And in fact, they always talk about it as if it's a positive thing. It's going to make us richer, increase productivity, and also efficiency. The word efficiency. Well, years ago, I had a friend who kept saying to me, "When you say efficient, what for whom? Everything is efficient for somebody." But when you hear financial reporters, financial journalists, and the so-called great minds on Wall Street talking about productivity and efficiency, that's really kind of a propagandistic happy talk for exploiting workers. And I guess my question is, am I right about that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So when the plane crashed into that helicopter in D.C. Recently, the Washington Post reports there were 2 air traffic controllers doing the work of 4. Now, if you just look at the numbers, if you just do an analysis, having 2 people do the work of 4, that's an increase in productivity. Of course, if planes are crashing because of this so-called increase in productivity, we would say, no, that's a huge failure, right? So yes, you're absolutely right that productivity can easily be used a mask for exploitation of workers. If you want to have appropriate work-life balance, if you want to work and also take care of your kids and spend time with your family and have vacation time and live a full life, then compared to someone who doesn't have all these things, then you have lower productivity. So if you have a rich, whole, full life, your productivity is low. If you're working, like those air traffic controllers 6 days a week, 10 hours a day, you're being more productive. So yes, we have to look critically at this, that the productivity can easily and efficiency can easily mask exploitation. So with the federal government, we should be asking, how can we have a better government that works better to keep the American people safe, to keep the American people healthy, to enrich our lives. So certainly with that framework, having 2 air traffic controllers when you need 4, that doesn't make us safer. So that would be seen as a negative, not as a positive. If you bring that lens, saying what's good for the safety, the health, and the well-being of the American people, that should be at the forefront.
It should be. Daryl Jones.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Santita, and thank you for that analysis, Dr. Austin. One of the things that we did on my show on WOL in DC is that we had Senator Van Hollen come in and talk about the air traffic situation at the DC National Airport. And one of the interesting things that he brought out was that Congress and the Senate knew years in advance that DC Airport was overpopulated with planes and underpopulated with staff. And they had just taken a vote on additional planes to be able to utilize this already overcrowded field. And as a result of that, the 4 senators that make up the DC, Virginia, Maryland area voted against it, but all the other senators voted in favor of it. Saying that their personal ability to get to DC was something that was more important. So when you're discussing the whole thing with the air traffic controllers and all of the financing and everything that goes into it, it seems as though through the Congress that they certainly have a lot of personal feelings toward not necessarily funding the safety of the passengers that are there, but more importantly, being in the avenue of the airlines and the industry that's there. So I appreciate what you were lifting up. One of the things that you mentioned in your article that I wanted to ask you about, though, was dealing with immigration cases. And the backlog of immigration cases and them then cutting the judges that would hear the asylum cases, so the immigration would continue to build up and then complain about all the immigrants that are here in the country, and then start this process now of trying to deport them, and the impact, the economic impact that all of this is having. Could you just sort of share some of the analysis there?
Yeah, so I will speak quickly, and then unfortunately I have to go. Yeah, so there's a huge backlog, over 1 million cases, and it grows every year. And this is, again, this didn't just happen. This has been going on for many, many years, which is how you get such a huge backlog. And, Congress has refused to address the problem. And unfortunately, part of it is because, as you suggest, it's a political football. People like complaining about, being able to campaign and complain about the problem, not about solving the problem. And we know how to solve the problem. There have been 2 or 3 comprehensive immigration reform bills that have come up, and they've been shot down for various reasons. The most recent one by President Trump, because why? He wanted to campaign on the issue. He says, don't fix this. I want to make noise about this problem. So that's unfortunately why it persists. We know how to solve it, but we don't have politicians who have the political will to really address the problem. So that's a real thing. The other thing I want to mention is that our country, this country historically has relied a great deal on immigrants to grow. Many of our largest companies, Fortune 500 companies, I think almost half of them were founded by people who are immigrants or the children of immigrants. A lot of the work in our economy are done by immigrant labor. So the policies that Trump are pursuing, one, the sort of, again, this sort of unintelligent, chaotic approach to addressing not even the root problems, but just attacking immigrants as opposed to reforming the immigration system. That's going to have a negative effect on the U.S. economy. The tariffs are going to have a negative effect on the U.S. economy. And like I said, all of these cuts to the federal government, which is a huge part of the American economy, is going to have a negative effect. So I'm beginning to worry that all this madness that the Trump-Musk administration is doing might push us into a recession, because these policies they don't understand what they're doing. They don't fully appreciate the impact. So that's yet another worry. I mean, there's the ethical problems, there's the civil rights problems, there's the racial justice problems, there's the gender justice problems, and now there's the sort of economic problems that they seem to be fostering. So with that, I thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
On the
Algernon
show,
Austin.
and I wish you all to have a more productive discussion.
Well, cannot wait to have you back. Dr.
Yes.
Algernon Austin, economist at the Center for Economic Policy and Research, head of their Race and Economic Justice Project. Well, everybody, let's talk about this. Hey, Jewel. Hey, Wanda. Miss Wanda down there in North Carolina. Jewel up in New York City. Bernadette, how you doing, sweetie? Shalom to you, Robert. Mike, how you doing, sweetie? Everybody, please like and share, like and share, like and share. Are you surprised to know that the federal government has been shrinking for several generations? And the question is, can we afford to shrink the federal government? How about it? Think about it. I'm all for making technological advancements. That having been said, I also like speaking to human beings. So if I have a question about a service, I go past, I press 000. I'm impatient. And someone might maybe impatiently answer the phone. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm trying to keep your job for you. And I like talking to a person. That's very important because people have different kinds of analyses, Attorney Terry O'Neill, and you need that. Attorney Daryl Jones, WOL Radio in DC, every Tuesday at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. This so much of what he told us flies in the face of what we are being told. And corporate media are guilty because they have not challenged the notion, the lie, that federal government is bloated and unproductive. They have not challenged the lie that it's just growing and it's out of control. The fact is it's been shrinking. But their services have been shrinking too. It's not that people don't want a service, but try to make a phone call and get an answer. It's just very, very hard to do. And I just have so many questions about this, but I want to switch right over to the workers, because now, let me start with you, Terry O'Neill, Attorney Terry O'Neill. People are frightened. Now it's getting real for a lot of people. Tens of thousands of people have taken the buyout, and you have the courts ruling all over the place. What is this? And people are not taking the buyouts. Well, I read in the news today, some of them are just going to be laid off. So, okay, if you take the buyout, what happens? Do you get a payout? If you're laid off, does that mean you go into unemployment? I mean, Terry, what happens? What's the difference?
So the interesting thing about the buyout, from what I've read, Santita, is that it was a serious scam. In fact, the small print in that buyout essentially said, we can change our minds about what we pay you when you leave. We can change our minds about how much work you'll have to do after you, quote unquote, take this buyout, and you can't do anything about it. And by signing this piece of paper, you agree that you will never, ever be able to object to anything we say, including you will never be able to accuse us of not living up to our obligations under this buyout. P.S. We don't have any obligations under this buyout. That's in the small print of the buyout. And it wasn't stated in exactly that way, but that's the import of it from what I've read. So that was why so many, you had people in Congress getting up to say, don't take the buyout. It's a scam. It's a total scam. But that's typical of Elon Musk, right? And by the way, a couple of years ago, I heard somebody say he was brilliant. Man is not brilliant. What his superpower is lying without conscience, lying repeatedly for his own benefit and his own profit without conscience. Okay, that's a superpower. It's not the same thing as being particularly intelligent. What Elon Musk did at Twitter is exactly what he's doing now in the US government. He's just going in and firing people willy-nilly because he figures that he can still make money even if other people are suffering terribly. If people have airplane crashes, if people, the air traffic controllers lose their jobs, their families are decimated, and in the meantime, people are hurt by air crashes. None of this hurts Elon Musk. He really thinks he can keep his skirts clean, and that's what he's doing. And what that reminds me most of, Santita, is the Deep South, beginning in 1619. When aristocratic men from England come over to Virginia, they come into the Deep South, they figure they can become plantation owners, and the first thing they can do is get workers that they don't have to pay. So they create this massive enslavement system that is geared toward exploiting workers and not paying them, this whole slavery system. And then in order to defend it, they spent an enormous amount of resources on propagandizing Irish immigrants, people like my ancestors who came to this country as Irish immigrants, to hate Black people and to participate in the system of apartheid and enslavement that these planters had created. And why do I talk about that? Well, because the Deep South has always been much poorer than the industrialized North or the West Coast, right? And a lot of that is because exploiting workers actually pulls everybody down. When I lived in Louisiana, I practiced law down there. It was really striking to me that the wealthiest people in states like Mississippi and Louisiana and Alabama didn't have the same resources that upper middle class families had in California or Colorado or Washington State, right? That when you expand the middle class, you actually do improve the lives of everybody. right? But in these heavily apartheid states like the Deep South, everybody gets dragged down. Now, if you stay in Mississippi, you're gold. It's fine because you're in the upper class and you're way above everybody else. But you go outside of Mississippi and your money doesn't really buy that much because you're participating in a system of impoverishment. Elon Musk is leading this country right down that road. And may I say, he's doing it. He's able to do it because there's so many people in this country, so many decision makers in this country who are dedicated to what they conceive of as capitalism. They think that they are being good capitalists. In fact, they are participating in a racist, patriarchal, capitalist economic system, right? Almost all the heads of the Fortune 500 and the Fortune 200 are white men. And a patriarchal capitalist system requires women to be subordinated to men. It has to do with reproducing little workers and making sure that a lot of workers have to be exploited. Well, women as a group, that's historically been pretty easy to exploit women as a group. So they get exploited in this capitalist system. And obviously, communities of color, especially African-American workers, are continually bombarded with efforts to be exploited. That's why the federal government has been such a good employer, because the federal government so far has not been able to break its own rules. Well, it has a little bit, but less than in the private sector.
Sure.
And the federal government has been a pretty good employer for African Americans, including the military, for African Americans who find exploitation and exclusion elsewhere. They find it in the federal government. So I feel like I'm babbling a little bit, but my overall point is, my sense is that what Elon Musk is trying to achieve here is sort of ultimate exploitability of most workers and employees.
See, but I don't think that you're babbling. There are so many moving parts to this because we're watching a dismantling of the government, and there's a lot that's unspoken here, Terry, because the more you talk about it, the more you start thinking about all of these pieces that are connected. I heard Kevin McCarthy from Shark Tank, one of President Trump's contemporaries, last night on CNN. He said something that I thought was interesting. He was complimentary of the president. He said, you need to cut, and keep cutting until you get all the waste out, get it all out. He said, that is a tactic that we employ when our companies are bankrupt or near bankruptcy. I'd like to know what's really going on here. Because America, our workforce, our government workforce has been shrinking, but so are we. The negotiations for Ukraine are not happening in the United States. They're happening in Riyadh. That's not lost on me. When they're talking about the Middle East, they're not talking about coming to the United States. They're in Qatar. They're talking to the Saudis. We're getting excluded from a lot of conversations. We're looking at Greenland, Gulf of Americas, and all of that. We're really we're concentrating less on the world, and we're of less consequence in the world. We're looking at the hemisphere because we have been damaged by so much that we've done, Terry. And, and that's why this conversation, you're not babbling. All of these pieces are connected. That's why when I listened to him last night, I said, what is he kind of dropping on us here? Because I try to hear everything, and when I hear, and I know that I know he and the president are at least passing friends, and he's been a champion of the president. So, and he's been in his social circle. So I said, I want to hear what he has to say, because maybe I'm not going to get something from the president because he won't say or he can't say, but his people can tell me something. And I said, okay, well, where are we? Because I see Larry Ellison. No one ever sees him from Oracle. And He's got Mark Zuckerberg dressing differently, long hair, suits, and all of that. It's just, I don't know. There's just a lot going on here, a lot, and I'm seeing people who are about to lose big jobs. Daryl, PG County, that's the wealthiest Black county, Terry, in the country.
Exactly.
You can have a 2 government job home and make a very, I mean, between you, you can make $300,000-$400,000 a year
That's right.
and buy a nice home, send your children to school, live a nice life in an affluent area.
Yeah.
That's over. And as they're dismantling they've dismantled affirmative action on the public and private side.
Mhm.
DEI is the fruit. The root is affirmative action.
Mhm. Mhm.
Where we went to get, I mean, of course, affirmative action advantaged white women.
Oh yeah.
Women
Oh,
are still asked, I don't care what color we are, we're still asked to get the coffee in a boardroom. I might be the CEO. I might own the whole company. Every woman I know of every conceivable background has that story. Every last one of us. I don't care what color we are. Every last one of us has been diminished in some way because we are women. Everybody. And the government has been our last place of refuge in terms of employment. And we know we have a place to seek recourse because it's against the law for you all to do that. All of that's being taken away, Daryl.
Mhm.
I mean, so Terry, you're not babbling. Maybe I am babbling. I don't know, but I'm now hearing the stories from people because people are now frightened. Daryl, you live in that area. Terry, you've lived in that area. I have lived there. What is going on?
I mean, you're 100% on mark, Santita. People are very frightened, particularly in the Maryland area, because we are very dependent on federal government jobs. And you are correct when you're saying you may have a household where both the mother and the father, or the two folks living there, are federal employees. But not only that, their children are generally employed by the federal government as well. So, it is a strong federal government employee sector that we have here in the state of Maryland. And, what we're seeing happen is a lot of the fear of, as what am I going to do? They're coming after our jobs. What are we going to do? And we know that with the buyouts that were being offered, that there were some, 77,000 people that accepted these buyouts.
Yeah.
So they put themselves in a position where they're not even going to be able to fight to say that they were illegally removed or any of this stuff, or even be entitled to enter the ball game asking for any type of funding as a result of their voluntary positions of what they're taking.
So you're saying that once you sign off on the buyout, even before you've received a dime, you've cut yourself out of recourse.
It's a voluntary resignation is what you're doing. You're voluntarily resigning your position from the government. And there's a real small sliver of cases that deal with people that are forced out, that might be able to be entitled to some type of compensation from being forced out. But that's extremely rare. And you're now entering into a written agreement where, as Terry was laying out, when there's nothing to stop a person from entering into a bad agreement. There's nothing to save you from entering into a bad agreement. No one has an opportunity, no one has a responsibility to stop you from doing and entering into a bad agreement. Once you're in that bad agreement called a buyout, the question is, what can you then do? You're not going to be able, in all likelihood, to try to come back to say that I've been pushed out of my employment. These were the terms that I agreed to, but I was pushed out and I negotiated my way out and I accepted the buyout, but I didn't really know what I was doing. I wasn't doing it freely and voluntarily.
But they didn't know, and I mean, and we're getting reports now, Daryl and Terry, that they're being interviewed by Doge, and the interviews are hostile.
Mhm.
You know, and back in the day, there used to be some cases under contract law. This is like decades and decades ago, that said that basically, if the contract is so one-sided, and there is enormous power differential between, you know, the one side and the other side, and the folks that hold all the power wrote the contract and just made it really difficult for the other person to negotiate. That could be, as Daryl says, another sliver of a chance that people would be able to say, wait a minute, this is this contract can't go because power differential, and you know, and I didn't understand the fine print. But it's very, very difficult to win those cases because literally the judge has to conclude that that judge's conscience is shocked. It's a shock the conscience exception to a written contract. But as Daryl says, it's very difficult to win a case to say that the judge's conscience is shocked by such a lopsided agreement. I have to tell you, the one thing that gives me a little bit of hope with that agreement is the paragraph A says, you know, you get all these things under the agreement, and then paragraph triple Z says, oh, by the way, we don't have to give you any of those things. Mm-hmm. That actually might be a kind of shocking of the conscience piece. But again, and what lawyer is going to take that case on contingency? They have to pay a lawyer to bring that case. So
right,
yeah,
right.
Who's going to take these cases?
And remember, the judge is going to hear it.
Yes, right.
I mean, they're in Washington, and they're in Virginia, they're in Maryland. And Virginia, yes. I mean, and Virginia is pure military.
Yes, right.
So,
right.
I mean, that's the difference. I mean, you have civil servants really in Maryland, but you have military personnel in Virginia. And it's just, you know, it's very interesting. And I think it's an interesting time, but I think that we've got to really take this apart, everybody, and ask questions, because you need to find out you need to know who the members of DOJ are. You have the right to know that. And you need to know if there are conflicts of interest with Elon Musk. Or, I mean, now you see that Jeff Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, who has a lot of government contracts through various businesses, he refused to take a Fire Elon advertisement in his newspaper. So how free, I mean, so what can I trust what you're reporting in the Washington Post? And then you have many people in media now who are really apoplectic because they're saying that, you know, our viewership is going down. Our readership is going down. You're right, because I don't believe you. Because you don't ask these questions. We're asking you. I have not heard anyone I've not heard anyone ask to just amplify the point that the government workforce has been shrinking for 80 years. By 2/3.
Yeah.
That's a whole lot of jobs that are gone now. So, well, you know what? I want to get closing thoughts from each of you for about a minute. We're going to continue to take this apart because I think we're going to have to start looking at lawsuits, and of course, people can't take these cases, so many on contingency, but some people are going to have to file some class action lawsuits. But it's like, like you said, Daryl, where do you file? On the moon? Daryl? Yeah, of course, on WOL every Tuesday at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. Please check him out, along with Attorney Barbara Arnwine, some of the best information on the radio. Attorney Daryl Jones.
Thank you, Santita. And, you know, to all those federal workers that are out there that have accepted the buyout, you know, I certainly wish you well, and I'm certainly holding you in my thoughts and prayers. Because one of the things that we've seen happen is that the federal judges have been siding with the government with regards to the buyouts that are there, not on their side. the one thing I want to certainly place in listeners' minds at this point is that given everything that we've laid out with regards to the buyout, with regards to the efficiency, with regards to the how government has been shrinking rather than growing, remember this: the folks that did these buyouts, we have pending right now, as we speak, within the next 3 to 4 weeks, a government shutdown that could happen.
Mhm.
If the government shutdown happens, do they get paid? What happens? What's in the small print? So all of these issues are there. And I think there's just so much to try to open up and to unveil with regards to and peel back to see what's going on here, Santita. There's a lot more to do.
Will they get paid? Well,
Yeah.
I don't know. Attorney Terry O'Neill.
Yeah, I want to encourage your listeners, Santita, especially any who might be working for the federal government, to contact their unions and to find ways of beginning to build unions of their own. It's very important to have tenants unions right now. It's very important to begin building at the grassroots level communities that you can have. I live in Nashville, where NIH funds an enormous amount of the healthcare, both the services and the research that happens in Middle Tennessee, and that's being cut. Meharry Medical School is the oldest HBCU medical school in the country. They all tried it after the Civil War. They were created, and then when Reconstruction was destroyed, there was a huge push to destroy all of the Black medical schools. Meharry was the only one that survived that. It is a storied institution, does extremely important research as well as providing services. We don't know yet what's going to happen to Meharry or Vanderbilt medical college. So it's a big deal here. And what I hear people talking about literally is, I'm going to start growing the vegetables in my backyard, and you guys can come and help me. We have to start banding together and understanding. Frankly, the Democrats don't know what they're doing. They are failing. They haven't figured it out yet. But I would also encourage your listeners to go check out the Democratic Socialists of America. This is an organization that believes deeply in democracy and believes deeply that every one of us should have a fair say, not only in our community, in our workplaces, in all of the different communities. Everybody should have a fair voice. Now, people have tried to demonize the word socialist. I'm not down for that. I'm a happy socialist, and I think you want to demonize it. Come talk to me.
Well,
the Democratic Socialists of America, I think, is a very, very good organization, and they do have chapters all around the country. That can be a base, but that can be a place where you can find some neighbor of yours that knows how to grow vegetables.
But Terry, first of all, as Americans, we fight for free speech. We say that we are for free thought and free association, if it's peaceable. And yet we quarrel with people when they have different belief systems. And we're more socialist than we know. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, that's socialist. And if you don't believe in socialism, then you need to talk to Wall Street. They socialize their losses and they privatize their wins, and you ought to be tired of that.
Exactly.
You ought to be tired of that. So whenever
may I just say,
I got 1 minute.
George W. Bush tried to privatize Social Security. He failed at that. But 2 years after, he went on this and his whole privatization pitch was, we'll turn over all your retirement savings to Wall Street. 2 years later, he and Wall Street drove the entire United States economy off a cliff in 2007, if you recall. And it was years before President Obama could drag us back. And we're not, and many of us have not recovered. That's right. But that's what privatization does for you. Yeah.
Well, that's what it does. These people are playing, and what we have to do is make a decision about the kind of society that we want. Now is the time for that, everybody. Now is the time. We're at that inflection point. Every republic has to refashion itself after about 200 plus years or so. We're coming up on our 250th. That's where we are. So who are we, really? We're not a slaveholding nation anymore. Women can vote. Don't say that we've not made progress. We've made tremendous progress. We just have much more progress to make because the problems that we have, the issues are deep in our DNA. They're in the bone marrow. We can work it out. Well, now it's our turn to work it out. So let's get to it, everybody. And remember, I will just say this: you keep hope alive, because you can fight back. You can. But reach out to your unions, create some unions, and unify with people, because together we will win. Alone we will lose. I'm Santita Jackson. God bless you, everybody. See you tomorrow on the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio. Thank you.